Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, March 9th, 2021. Ready to roll on another show? It doesn't matter, because that's what's happening regardless. Bill reminds us all the way from Portland, Maine, that the show must go on. The Kagro in the Morning show is live now. What the hell's going on today? What about yesterday? Tomorrow? The year 2139? Well, he hopes that I know, or else we're all screwed, and, well, at least I am. Certainly me, and if I start off screwed, well, I don't know. I guess I'll have to do what I can to make sure that you survive. But we can figure out what's happening today readily enough, I think, if we read the newspapers. That's the practice on the show. Joan McCarter, we're hoping, will be able to drop by today. Not exactly sure of what's on the schedule today. Could be a busy day. Could be a day she needs to take some time away. Could be a day she needs to take it easy. But I think she assured me yesterday everything would be probably okay. And so we'll leave the door open for her to join us in the second hour, and there will be plenty, of course, to go over. Let's see. I note for the record this morning that our good friend from the internets, Oliver Willis, is fully vaccinated now, having gotten the Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine and announced it to the world, along with a semi-covered up version of his vaccination card, which I suppose will serve to his passport to the world of open commerce. Although if you, I guess if you lived in Texas or Mississippi, you could have that anyway, whether you were vaccinated or not. But you know that story. I just like the way he did it, and picking up on the Trump and Trumpist style here. Tweeting out, "Thank you, President Biden. Now I'm fully vaccinated," with plenty of exclamation points and hashtags. He powerfully got FEMA to strongly open the vaccine sites. Never in history have so many Americans been vaccinated for COVID. He works for us because he loves our country. And he's got a new hashtag going, and I don't even know what it stands for, but I imagine it is parody like MABA, MABA. I don't know exactly what it's supposed to stand for. I never did find out what. But there you go. Hashtag MABA, hashtag vaccinated, and then a whole bunch of those American flag emojis and a bunch of other stuff, too. I think ice cream cones and stars, what it looks like to me. So good news for Oliver, good news for the rest of us as well. They're out of Johnson & Johnson vaccine in our area and aren't getting any back until the end of April is what the initial announcement is. I think they'll surprise us and come back with a shipment sooner than that. But I suppose after talking it over a couple of times at home and once or twice with Greg and reading all the articles, there's no point in waiting, even though I was excited to sort of boost the availability of this. Well, I guess I would be reducing the availability if I took the shot, J&J. But I don't know. After the weird incident with Detroit, I thought, well, maybe this would be a good way to, one, get fewer shots, and two, boost the popularity of Johnson & Johnson. But it seems to be plenty popular around here. And Greg told us yesterday, Detroit reversed its decision and will be accepting those Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And I bet there were a lot of people who thought, no, thank you. I'd rather have that one-shot deal. Thanks very much. I'm happy to have that. We've discussed the impossibility of comparing the efficacy numbers as between the first-generation vaccines, the two-shot vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna, and this Johnson & Johnson one. So I'm pretty satisfied that we're never going to be able to settle as between the two of them which one is objectively the best. So I guess it's back to take what you can get, and we'll be working on that in our area and trying to figure out when we can schedule time to go in and have them jab us and give us another card that says come back and get stuck again later. Really looking forward to that. I think given the reactions that other members of my family have had to those second shots, I think I have to plan for when that second shot comes around. And I guess, they'll tell you the day, and there's not much flexibility with that. But I don't know whether that'll be a day that I say the following morning, no show if I'm not feeling well, or what. Or I guess I could just get on the air and say, this sucks, but go get your shot anyway. I don't know if that's really helpful or not to anybody. But I guess back in the day, you would live blog the whole thing, so maybe we can document it on the radio as well. All right, let's see. Plenty of other things going on today. Some stuff that I wanted to get to yesterday and didn't, so the way is clear for us to pick up on a couple of these themes. Let's start with this one here, because again, I guess I thought I might organize things differently today, but why should today be different from other days? I have no idea. And the Seder coming up, it's important to make sure that, I think right now we have to practice that most of these days are going to be like every other one, so that when the Seder comes around and we have the opportunity to ask why those days, those nights are different from all others, if they're not different, well, it takes a lot of the air out of things. So we'll just go through pocket reverse chronologically. And this picks up a little bit on things we've discussed before. There's some more information available. We'll see how valuable it is on Joe Manchin and what the hell's going on inside his head. And I don't know whether we're really getting what's truly going on inside his head from CNN reporting or Politico reporting or anyone's reporting for that matter. But this one sent over to me as a follow-up in terms of just keeping an eye on the ongoing story, what's going on. I thought we did a pretty good job on Friday, was it, that we read through a couple of Joe Manchin profiles and essentially asserted that we still couldn't tell much about what was going on in his head. But part of the weekend's reporting, given all the activity around the Senate's work on finishing up the COVID relief bill, lots of analysis of what's going on in Joe Manchin's head, and I found that the reporting over the weekend largely reached the same conclusion that we had reached, which was, well, if you ask him to talk about what's going on in his head, you're not going to get anywhere. It won't explain logically what's happening and what his thought process is. He's still kind of as, I was going to say unpredictable, but he's not really unpredictable. He's just inexplicable is the better word. So it's cleared up nothing. So I at least felt like, okay, we didn't waste our time on Friday. I felt like we might have, given that we still couldn't figure out what made Manchin tick. But as it turns out, no one else can either. So we just found out that we couldn't figure him out before some other significant portion of the country found out. Here's more about that. This time from a slightly different angle of approach. Manu Raju at CNN, along with help from Ted Barrett, Phil Mattingly, and Lauren Fox, put together this piece, How Democrats Miscalculated Manchin and Later Won Him Back. What went on Saturday when, and I guess Friday into Saturday, when Manchin not only, of course, was a holdout and voted against including all the procedural votes that would have led to the inclusion of the minimum wage hike in the COVID relief bill. He wasn't going to be on board for that. And we all understood that to be the case. And then as we were leading up to the rest of the votorama and the votes involved in it, and the various issues that would be addressed, there was what happened? It was the issue of the size of the relief checks and the size and rate of additional unemployment insurance premiums that would be paid during the COVID relief period, and knocking that down from $400 additional dollars a week to $300. And Manchin, again, holding out and trying to drive the numbers down, drive down the cutoff or phase out of additional support checks, all sorts of things. All the things we didn't want to have happen. Manchin began putting out feelers, about demanding even bigger cuts for whatever calculation he was making politically, and no one can really explain it. But it looked for a while like the whole thing appeared to be falling apart. But eventually, with enough discussion with him, he was brought around to where, okay, now we can count his vote on the majority side here and move forward and pass this bill. And they did. So what happened in that interlude? This is CNN's attempt at explaining it. It was Friday afternoon, and President Joe Biden was on the phone with Senator Joe Manchin, the conservative West Virginia Democrat, who felt blindsided by his party leaders, really, and now was at risk of defecting and effectively torpedoing a central pillar of the White House's domestic agenda. Just a couple of hours earlier, as he walked onto the floor ahead of votes on Biden's $1.9 trillion, COVID relief plan, got the trillion right, Manchin was stunned about the last-minute dealings of his party leaders with the backing of the White House. What were these things? For the first time, he learned that Democrats were seeking to advance a new plan on jobless benefits that would allow people to ensure their first $10,200 was tax-free. How interesting that would be a hang-up for a conservative Democrat. Lower taxes? I'm concerned. Manchin told colleagues he knew nothing about that tax provision, yet Democratic leaders thought that Manchin was on board since their rank-and-file senators had reached out to him and reported back to party bosses that he was with them. They had told the White House things were in good shape. But Manchin was not on board, making clear he was not going to be jammed by his party leaders into accepting something he didn't like, according to sources who talked to him, underscoring the power of an individual senator to derail a new president's agenda in the 50-50 Senate. Asked why Democratic leaders' dispute with Manchin wasn't resolved ahead of time, Michigan Senator Debbie Stabenow said on Saturday, "We thought it was." Interesting. The resulting confusion and chaos and miscommunication between Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and his most important swing vote put Washington on edge, threatened to blow up a delicately negotiated compromise, and force Democrats to leave a vote open longer than any in modern history, nearly 12 hours, as they engaged in a furious lobbying campaign and horse trading to get Manchin on board. Privately, about half a dozen Democratic senators were engaged in constant discussions with Manchin, hoping to find a way to win him back, all as Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman was speaking with Manchin multiple times an hour about his own alternative that Manchin supported, but that Democratic leaders wanted to defeat. I was trying to be the catcher in the rye. I was trying to keep him talking to the leadership, said Senator Angus King, an independent from Maine who said he was speaking with Manchin constantly on Friday. My goal was to keep him talking and not let it fall apart. For Biden, though, the approach amounted to a soft sell. He was deliberately careful not to add pressure to the situation, instead choosing to give Manchin space and listen to his concerns, a source with knowledge of the discussion said. But Biden did underscore one overarching point: how crucial it was to reach an agreement to get the bill toward the finish line given the urgency of the current economic and public health crisis. Manchin, two sources said, was urged by the president to do what he thought was right, in essence to vote his conscience. It was a reflection of a relationship that multiple sources said has been in a solid place since Biden took office. Manchin, of the mind that Biden is an honest broker, and Biden, cognizant of the fact that Manchin is his own senator and doesn't take kindly to being jammed. Though some dispute as to whether he was, but okay, give him the space to feel like he is right about that. I thought, obviously, a strategy that works. Manchin, who characterized his Friday conversation with Biden as good, said Saturday the talks took longer than it should have. They should have. But he added, we got it done, and we got a better deal. Should have said they, but it says it. Let's just say we had some projects that lasted 12 hours, said Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin. It took a little longer than we thought. Okay. Let's see. Next section of it here says Manchin had privately signed off on the GOP plan. Days prior, Manchin had committed to backing an alternative plan by Portman, who proposed extending jobless benefits to $300 a week through July, reducing the benefit by $100 in the bill that passed the House. But Democrats, fearful that Portman's plan would pass, worked privately behind the scenes to move forward with their own proposal to head off the Portman plan. The new Democratic plan would also reduce the benefits to $300, but extend them through September. And in order to head off backlash from the left by simply slashing back on the benefits, they added a sweetener, ensuring that the first $10,200 would not be taxed. By mid-morning Friday, Democratic leaders were feeling confident with where they were heading. They believed Manchin had signed off on the proposal after his conversations with a fellow swing vote, Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, and Delaware Senator Tom Carper, the lead sponsor of the plan. But Manchin said Friday morning he had no knowledge of the tax provision. It's unclear how that message was lost in translation. I never heard about this at all. This is the first time I've ever heard about it. That morning, I said, wait a minute, Manchin told reporters on Saturday about the provision. What an eloquent statement to make. I said to myself, I says, wait a minute. Okay. And he bluntly told his colleagues Friday he would not vote for the plan unless there were changes, prompting a day-long lobbying effort and leaving many of his colleagues perplexed. I would be perplexed too. Your problem is you're conservative and I'm lowering taxes, and that's bad because it's low taxes on poor people, and that makes you upset because you're from West Virginia. You'll have to explain this to me. Anyway, he bluntly told his colleagues on Friday he would not vote for a plan unless there were changes, right? There was this day-long lobbying effort. Asked by CNN why he didn't resolve his differences with Manchin on the front end, Schumer suggested he was surprised by the pushback by his West Virginia colleague. People have new differences all the time, Schumer said Saturday after the bill's passage. He added, that 8 hours is meaningless compared to the relief that the American people are going to get, and if it helped us to get that, great. That's true too. And I guess if there was 8 more hours of delay, then the 17 hours of delay that were erased by Chris Van Hollen's unanimous consent request the other night, well, that's good news. What did we waste? 10 hours reading, then got 17 back, so we were plus 7. Then we lost 8 to negotiating with Manchin. That puts us at a net negative 1 hour for what the Republicans went into the bill work hoping for maximum delay, and they got a net 1 hour out of it. So not too bad. The failure to sort out their differences on the front end surprised many Democrats because the two men have a frank and blunt relationship. One's frank, one's blunt, I guess. I truly love all of my caucus, Schumer said. Even Manchin? Yes, absolutely, the New York Democrat said. What else is he going to say? But many were nervous that the whole effort could collapse. On Friday, as Schumer, Carper, and others were scrambling to fix the Manchin problem, Carper sat alone on a couch in the private Senate foyer, or foyer if you prefer. He was hunched over with his head almost between his knees and a phone held tightly to his ear. He looked both pained by what was happening and intent on fixing it. He told a Republican colleague later, things were looking grim. We're stuck, Carper told Texas Senator John Cornyn in the halls of the Senate. It was frustrating, Stabenow said when asked about the nearly 12 hours that the Senate was in gridlock. We were trying to figure a way forward, which we did. I always felt that was possible. I always felt we would. What's up next? Day-long horse trading and arm twisting. Manchin and Democratic leaders were frantically trading proposals back and forth. Multiple sources familiar with the talks said Manchin, according to one source familiar with the matter, wanted the amendment broken up into 2 so that the Senate could vote separately on the weekly unemployment benefit of $300 and the tax-free component. That would have been interesting. Without the 2 items packaged together, however, Democratic leaders knew the tax-free piece would fail. That's amazing. Again, cutting taxes now is going to fail because there are too many Republicans in the Senate. All of a sudden, higher taxes, a huge priority. When it's on the poorest people in the country, the people certainly in most need of help, direct action and help. Here's a couple of bucks, and what the hell? We'll let you have it tax-free because we know you need to spend every cent of it. No! We have to have higher taxes, say Republicans all of a sudden. And Joe Manchin. Weird. All right, so they didn't want to break it up because they thought it would fail that way. Leadership tried to impress upon Manchin multiple times that what the senior senator from West Virginia was asking for would not pass the House. where Speaker Nancy Pelosi had her own narrow margin, and a group of progressives was already upset that the $15 minimum wage had been stripped from the Senate bill. We need to talk a little bit more about that and what went on there at some point. Maybe we can follow this up. Let's continue on with the story for now, though. It was pretty clear that there was an enormous amount of pressure, said South Dakota Senator John Thune, the number 2 Republican. In a situation in the Senate with narrow margins, every man is a king and every woman is a queen. Okay, very nice that he included women and queens there, but of course, see what he's trying to do. It was clear there was an enormous amount of pressure after Democrats have just spent that time saying, well, we were all under pressure, but I was trying very hard not to pressure Manchin. So Thune's side of it is, it was clear they were trying to pressure him. Pressure, pressure, pressure. You can come over to our side where we won't pressure you at all. Yeah, sure. The White House was involved and consulted throughout, with officials working through the numbers of the various proposals that were traded back and forth, officials said. But they were also aware that this was a matter being negotiated by key Senate Democrats and made a point of being available but not overbearing, the officials said. Biden was available, but would only end up making one call to Manchin. He did, however, stay in touch with Schumer throughout. A senior administration official specifically pointed to Carper and Senators Ron Wyden of Oregon and John Tester of Montana and Mark Warner of Virginia, along with Schumer, as individuals who deserve a huge amount of credit for working through the final compromise. The primary focus for the White House throughout the hours of talks was ensuring any agreement did not change the overall contours of the rescue plan. That baseline, which was the driving force for the creation of the plan itself, was ensuring the help goes to the people who really need the help and being realistic about how long it will take the economy to recover, the official said. The final agreement with Manchin, White House officials determined, would still accomplish those goals. Biden agreed. The end result is essentially about the same, and so I don't think any of the compromises have in any way fundamentally altered the essence of what I put in the bill in the first place, Biden told reporters on Saturday after the vote. Ultimately, they all signed off on a plan to cap the eligibility of the non-taxable component to households with an annual income of $150,000 and extend the $300 in weekly benefits until September 6th. After the deal was struck, senators were ready to vote, but it wasn't until an hour before midnight when the Senate would begin voting in earnest on the flood of amendments that Republicans proposed, forcing senators to pull an all-nighter as Democrats rejected Republican calls to adjourn until Saturday morning. Senator Jim Inhofe, an 86-year-old Oklahoma Republican who told CNN he suffered a concussion in the last week after falling on ice, said he stayed up all night until the final vote to pass the bill shortly after noon on Saturday, but it wasn't easy. It made for a difficult night, Inhofe said of his concussion. Keep that in mind as we have filibuster fights coming forward, and people are leaning towards a compromise, for instance, with Manchin and Sinema, who refuse, they say, to change Senate rules to eliminate the filibuster. They might be open to the possibility of the old-fashioned style talking filibuster. Keep in mind that many, many Republicans are elderly and not really necessarily up to the task. Many aren't, and could carry the water for those who need the night off for a good night's sleep. But it's the results of the vote-a-rama, I think, are telling in terms of the real willingness of Republican senators to put up the fight necessary to maintain old-style filibusters. But those come with problems as well. One of the problems I want to discuss is the difficulty of getting to that reform. Remind me of that when I forget later. What the hell did I want to tell you about the filibuster? All right. On Saturday, as they were waiting for the final passage vote to start, Manchin walked all the way over to Portman's desk, and the two talked for several minutes in a very friendly and animated way. As Manchin was about to leave, they gave a little bit of a COVID-inspired hug, shoving their shoulders together, and Portman very quickly put his arm around Manchin's back. Asked about the exchange later, Portman said, "We have to continue to work together, and I appreciate that he kept his word and stuck to my proposal, even though he was strongly persuaded not to. I looked at him at one point like 12 hours ago and said, 'Joe, your arm looks kind of mangled. Was it twisted?' Poor Joe. Twisted arm. And they'll never do that to you on the Republican side." Okay, well, they put their best spin on it, but I think that kind of explains at least the timeline of how things happened. Yeah, what's still a mystery is how Joe Manchin somehow missed one of the major provisions of the Democratic proposal. Maybe it was late breaking, and he was already, being wooed by Republicans from the other side of the aisle, and wasn't paying close attention necessarily to the details, and they may have shifted in progress. But yeah, the only thing I can really take away from this that helps explain Manchin, although it too is a bit of a mystery, is why he was so put off at first by the notion that people who were getting additional help through unemployment insurance because they're unemployed in the middle of a big health crisis that's creating a financial crisis, an economic crisis. He so conservative was he was worried that too many people who were getting help to get by would also get help in the form of lower taxes, which is ordinarily something that conservative-leaning people think is a great idea under all circumstances, except we now learn, finally, that's out in the open, that when those tax cuts might be extended to people who are in trouble or who are already doing poorly as it is and on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale as it is, well, we can't have that. Tax cuts for the rich, those create jobs. Tax cuts for the poor, I don't know, something. And I guess Joe Manchin is susceptible to that, something we'll have to watch out for as we move forward. Okay, so things to discuss when we come back, in addition to other news articles, a little bit of a look back on the $15 minimum wage procedure, and some more discussion about filibuster reform and how to get there, something important to note along the way. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. It makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, so let's see. Turning around just slightly and heading back to the $15 an hour minimum wage campaign to include that in the reconciliation bill. Been doing some thinking about it and having some discussions on the side about it. And I think, okay, I mean, this isn't meant to be bashing of anybody here, but I think we should probably be realistic here and discuss how that process worked and didn't work. I want to start out by noting for the record here that when it was initially proposed that Bernie Sanders as Budget Committee chair would or should include a $15 minimum wage, federal minimum wage hike in reconciliation, there was, of course, a bit of pushback from people who understood the history of reconciliation, how it's been used, how it's been interpreted, and said, I'm not sure that that's something you'll be able to do. You might be over-promising a little bit there, and you shouldn't maybe do that. And now, there were probably mixed feelings among the Bernie camp and among the camps of his supporters that, this is something that they're going to tell you because they themselves, at bottom, oppose raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And, of course, that could be possible, but it could also be exactly what they were saying it was, which is that, whether we support raising the minimum wage to $15 or not, reconciliation is not likely to be a vehicle that, through which you can do this because of the history of the way the parliamentarian's office would regard minimum wage hikes and whether it would pass muster under the Byrd rule. Now, the pushback from the Bernie team there was, we know how to get that done, and we think we can make that argument. And even if it doesn't work, we'll highlight the issue. I don't think that they were at all times just totally unrealistic about it. Sometimes it came out that way. Sometimes they were more realistic about it and said, well, we realize we're in for a fight, but that's a fight we want to have. Even if it's doomed from the start, we would like to have that fight and highlight the issue and talk about the ridiculous Senate rules that get in the way of doing a popular thing that most people want and that, in fact, we think most senators want to do. And, okay, I can credit that much of the plan, but I also think that, he could have spent some more time being clear about it. Like, this likely will end up being contested certainly by Republican senators, maybe by not a few Democratic senators, and in all likelihood by the parliamentarian's office. And although it's true, and we've done our job in educating people that, yes, you can overrule the parliamentarian, you can even fire or threaten to fire the parliamentarian and see whether that gets you a different ruling. You can go ahead and fire them and hire someone who will give you a different ruling, or you think will give you a different ruling, or you think at least will be willing to give you that ruling in order to get the job. I suppose you could look at it that way. And I don't know whether really, honestly, the people who are in line to become the senior parliamentarian in the Senate are really the sorts of people who would make a deal like that. Or, ordinarily, I would say no. But, there are certainly differences of opinion between senior parliamentarians and their assistants. And they're very often arrived at in good faith, and there's a reasonable explanation for the assistant parliamentarian's contrarian conclusion, and if the majority prefers that one, well, then they will go ahead and make that switch. Anyway, I do think that maybe they could have done more from the Bernie camp to discuss the reality of it and say, well, sure, it's true that you can fire the parliamentarian, but I'm not the majority leader. I'm the budget chairman, but I'm not the majority leader. That's not in my hands. And there's no real indication from most of my colleagues in the Democratic caucus that they are supportive of replacing the parliamentarian, even if this parliamentarian rules against us with the minimum wage hike. That would be no different from the way most parliamentarians have ruled in the past. Firing the parliamentarian is an option that's available to you, but it really ought to be taken, it's a step that should be taken only with firmer grounding than I want this in and they say it shouldn't be in. And people say, well, Republicans would do that. They'd go to the mat for something like that. Well, sometimes. I mean, they have in the past, it's true. And on some of the dumbest things they could have done it for, disagreements over whether or not reconciliation would permit of their gigantic tax cuts, for instance. And so people pointed to that and said, well, they use it for their, firing power, for their cherished priorities. If this is one of our cherished priorities, shouldn't we do the same? And unfortunately, the message went out. Well, it was kind of a coy message. Like, well, maybe that's something that we could do. And people began to run with that. And then, of course, there was the weird misinterpretation, I think, of the description of the parliamentarian's role in all of this in Wikipedia, whereby people came away with the incorrect impression that vice presidents were uniquely empowered to overrule parliamentarians, which is not the case, although they might feel uniquely empowered to do so by virtue of the fact that they're vice presidents. But there's no special rule written anywhere or even precedent written anywhere that really backs that up, that it would really indicate that the power to overrule the parliamentarian belongs in some special way to the vice president. That's just not true. Anyway, So what ended up happening, as I was describing the situation and discussing with people over the weekend, was that Sanders found out on the early side just what I think he expected, that the parliamentarian's office would not permit the $15 an hour minimum wage, federal minimum wage provision, to slide past or through, or however you would describe it, the Byrd rule. That the Byrd rule required removal, in her opinion, of that provision from the bill. So that's early warning to them, and lets them know that, okay, if they put it in the body of the bill, the Republicans will know that. They'll know about the nature of my ruling. They will raise a point of order against its inclusion in the bill. And then you'll have a few options to try to save it if you want to have a vote and have a fight about it. One option, of course, is the one that was people were pushing all last week. Well, overrule the parliamentarian and simply rule that the $15 an hour minimum wage does pass muster. It isn't implicated by the Byrd rule, and you could give a justification, or not. You could just say it isn't if you want to, but they would probably want to give some sort of explanation, and maybe it would be that economic explanation, the broader economist's view that, well, of course there's a direct impact on revenues and outlays, because it'll do XYZ to our revenues, probably raise revenues as people earn more money and pay taxes on those higher wages. And there's offsetting things like the notion that fewer employers will be willing to employ fewer people at this higher rate, and so therefore fewer people will be paying taxes on their income, and so therefore, so there's an offset possibly. Of course, if they're getting unemployment, Joe Manchin would, of course, have them paying taxes on an unemployment insurance, so maybe it isn't the case that so many more would not be paying taxes. But now it will be, because we're going to give more people that unemployment insurance money tax-free. But anyway, that hadn't happened yet. So if you include the wage hike in the bill, Republicans would likely raise a point of order against it and ask for its exclusion. And at that point, you could, one, have the person in the chair, the presiding officer, regardless of what the parliamentarian says, rule instead that it's fine under the Byrd rule. Or they could take the parliamentarian's advice and rule that, no, this provision has to come out. If they overrule the parliamentarian, the Republicans are not without options. They would, at that point, appeal the ruling of the chair and say, you've ruled incorrectly here. One, we know what the parliamentarian's advice was, but even if we didn't, we would simply argue that you had done something wrong here and ruled the wrong way. And if they don't overrule the parliamentarian, the person in the chair, and instead say, yes, this is a problem and has to come out, the Democrats there have got two options available to them as well. Or I guess they have two options, whereas the Republicans had one. Their two options would be they could appeal the ruling of the chair and say, although you ruled with the advice of the parliamentarian behind you, we still think it's wrong, and we appeal it. And that would be, in both cases, no matter who's appealing the ruling or what the ruling was, the vote on whether or not the appeal should be sustained goes to the Senate. So the Senate gets to vote on what it thinks the answer is in either case. The other thing Democrats could have done if the chair had ruled against them, let's say, and in this case meaning that the wage hike had to come out under the Byrd rule, Democrats could have said, well, all right, we believe that the Byrd rule was correctly interpreted and that the minimum wage hike is in violation of the Byrd rule, but we want it in there anyway, and we'll ask for a vote on waiving the Byrd rule. And if the Senate votes in favor of waiving the Byrd rule, then despite the fact that it violates the Byrd rule, the material would be left in. that sounds kind of weird and contrary to the way rules work, right? Well, that's part of the reason why a waiver of the Byrd rule requires, you'll never guess how many votes in the Senate. Yeah, well, okay, you probably will guess, 60. So they didn't really want to go that direction, Democrats, because they thought they would never get to the 60 votes to win the waiver they wanted. They also weren't particularly keen on overruling the parliamentarian because it was out in the open, and everybody knew that carried some political risk. And not that anybody really pays attention to how the parliamentarian rules when they're out there at the voting booth. I was going to vote for this Democrat, but the parliamentarian ruled in a way that I thought was very solid back on, what was it, March, whatever the date was, 5th, 6th. And I don't know, this Democrat on the ballot here disagreed with the parliamentarian's ruling, and I thought the parliamentarian was pretty solid, and forget all the rest of this stuff. I don't care about the rest of the policy. I have no agreement whatsoever with this Republican, but chances are that he would have voted to uphold the parliamentarian, so therefore, no one really votes that way, obviously. But anyway, the Democrats had an option of how to structure the way this vote was going to come down. They could leave the minimum wage in the bill and have a Republican point of order raised against it, and they could seek a waiver of the point of order if they got an unfavorable ruling from the chair. They could seek to appeal the ruling of the chair if they got an unfavorable ruling. They could seek to replace the parliamentarian if they wanted to start out with a different ruling. Lots of options available. And then, of course, there was the theory that was circulating that if Democrats got an unfavorable ruling got a favorable ruling from the chair, that is, they put somebody in the chair who would agree to ignore the advice of the parliamentarian and rule that the Byrd rule did not disallow inclusion of the minimum wage hike, right? Then Republicans would appeal the ruling of the chair, but under the reconciliation rules, appealing the rule of the chair or overturning the rule of the chair, really, or I guess I should say it's better understood as overturning the ruling of the chair, but what it really is a question of, is the appeal well taken? I appeal the ruling of the chair. All right, well, is that appeal correct? So the yes vote here means overturn the ruling of the chair. Okay, but in order to overturn the ruling of the chair in a reconciliation context, because they're trying to hustle things along, right? It takes 60 votes to overturn the ruling of the chair. So if you got a favorable ruling from the chair, favorable to including the wage hike, then it would take a 60 vote margin to overrule the chair, having just overruled the parliamentarian. So the thinking was, well, if we can hold together 41 votes in favor of the underlying proposal here, saving the minimum wage, regardless of what procedure you have to use to get there, if we can have everybody ignore the procedure and vote for the underlying substance, the Republicans might not be able to put together 60 votes to exclude this material from, this minimum wage hike from the reconciliation bill. But they didn't go that route. And eventually, Bernie Sanders, as chairman of the budget committee, ends up deciding, here's what we'll do. We're going to take it out of the bill itself, and I will offer an amendment on the floor that would add it back in. And that's what we'll be voting on. And you might wonder, why do that? Because a lot of people got the inherent, the innate feeling that, well, putting it in the bill to start with is usually the better and more protected position. Adding things by amendment is usually the more difficult task. And, that is usually the case and probably would have been true here. But what I think ends up happening is Sanders opts to put it in by amendment because a point of order would likely be raised against the minimum wage provision no matter how it came to the floor. If it was in the underlying bill, Republicans would raise a point of order against its inclusion. If it's offered as an amendment, Republicans would offer a point of order against consideration of the amendment. And at any rate, there would certainly be a point of order raised and an opportunity for the chair to make its ruling, whether in agreement with the parliamentarian or contrary to the parliamentarian, and it would be a vote. But the way it ended up setting up when it was added as amendment was Sanders offers it, Republicans object and say we have a point of order, and Bernie Sanders then moves to have a vote on waiving the point of order, setting up, of course, a situation in which 60 votes were necessary in order to save the addition of the minimum wage, which is a taller order than what all the people who were circulating the memos said was necessary. The memo said we've got a way that saving the provision in the bill, however it gets there, requires only 41 Democrats to vote for it, not 50 Democrats plus 10 Republicans. And yet Bernie Sanders opted to do it the other way. And a lot of people thought, oh, well, he did that under pressure from the Senate leadership, and it was the corporate Senate Democratic leadership that forced his hand, and they're the ones who backed out of this and forced him to go the more difficult route. But it is his bill. It's the Budget Committee's bill, and though the Budget Committee chair does owe some allegiance, obviously, not only for the chairmanship, but owes some allegiance to the feelings of the rest of the caucus and how they want to approach it. It is possible that he could have been pressured into doing it that way against his better judgment. But what I think might have been the case is if Sanders says, to hell with all of you, I'm including it in the bill, and brings the bill to the floor, and there's a point of order raised against the thing, and whether they can get the parliamentarian to rule in their favor, whether they get the chair to rule in their favor, no matter what happens, in all likelihood, unless they're going completely nuclear, overruling the parliamentarian, ruling in favor of allowing the minimum wage hike to stay in the base bill, and voting against overruling the chair such that they can't get to 60 to overturn that ruling, that's all well and good and reflects well, I guess, on Bernie Sanders, but that probably wasn't going to be the case once the parliamentarian announced the ruling, and President Biden said he wasn't interested in seeing the ruling overturned by Democrats in the Senate. So we were bound to, one way or another, to seeing the provisions come out. If they are offered as part of the underlying bill, and Sanders moves to waive the point of order or overrule the parliamentarian or the chair or whatever and loses, it's a direct personal embarrassment to Sanders, who told everybody, I can get this done, and I now say, damn the torpedoes, we'll fight this out and see where the votes come down in the Senate. And he would have lost, and it would have been on Bernie Sanders. Whereas adding it as an amendment is, well, it's still on Sanders for offering the amendment, but it doesn't set up the big nuclear showdown that trying to jam it through in reconciliation could have brought. We either lose on the question of whether or not we're united enough to have the parliamentarian overruled and stick by it and engineer a win, which would, of course, as many Republicans pointed out, just open the doors for their doing the same thing later, although many people pointed out you did do the same thing already with the taxes back in 2001 and 2003, but people forget that already. Or there's just, well, I'll offer it as an amendment and we'll go through the regular procedure, and if there's a point of order against it, we'll try to raise the votes to waive it, and if we don't, we don't, and we'll just send out mailers to everybody who voted against the waiver as being anti-minimum wage and fight the thing out from there. Well, that's where we always fight this thing out, and it doesn't budge any votes. But it was less personally embarrassing somehow to Bernie Sanders, and instead puts all the pressure on the Democrats who didn't vote for the waiver. even though I guess it could be argued that they were just against waivers, not against minimum wage hikes. A little tenuous, but anyway, by shifting from keeping it in the underlying bill to putting it in an amendment, it means the villains end up being the people who vote against the waivers, like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and they did themselves no favors and played right into that role. But it doesn't come down on Bernie Sanders' shoulders. What could I do? I needed 60 votes, and that's hard to get in a 50-50 Senate. We did the best we could. Was it the most aggressive approach he could have taken? No. Was that what people who were insisting we should be firing parliamentarians were looking for? Well, they were looking for the most aggressive possible position to be taken. We should fight this out with maximum pressure on everybody. But we didn't. And ultimately, it was Sanders' call not to do it that way. And that might be smart. It might mean that we get to live to fight another day. It might have eliminated a lot of unnecessary drama for ending up at the same place. But what it wasn't was fighting tooth and nail with every tool available to us as hard as we possibly can with maximum pressure for the minimum wage. It just wasn't. And it's impossible to find a way to describe it that way and be accurate. So, okay. I just thought I would lay that one out there and say, I'm all right with him doing it that way. But for people who say, their way is it's Bernie or nothing, because he always goes full throttle, maximum, full speed ahead, highest pressure available. No, he doesn't. To me, that makes him a wiser and more effective senator. For people who don't care for that, though, well, you should get comfortable with it or be realistic about it. And you can there's some room for you to be hypocritical about it too if you want to be. I don't mind. It's okay. Everybody is flexible about some of their favorites, but you should realize what was and wasn't brought to bear there. All right, another topic similar, and for which we're running a little bit low on time before our top of the hour break, but we can discuss it on the other side. Might be able to cram it all the way in here, though. Nah, probably not. The filibuster reform issue. Now that Manchin is hinting at being open to something like, well, if we change the rules such that there was a talking filibuster, or as like Norm Ornstein wrote. And did we run all the way through his article? I can't remember. But we've certainly mentioned it enough times. The idea of changing the rules or changing the way the votes are counted on cloture votes. We mentioned, whether we went over the full extent of the Ornstein article or not, the way the votes are counted on cloture changed in 1975 from senators present and voting when it was when they lowered the threshold for cloture from 2/3 of the Senate. It was 2/3 of the Senate present and voting to 3/5 of the Senate. But the additional hook there was instead of 2/3, 67 votes, it would now be 3/5, which is 60 votes, but it would be 60 or 3/5 of the Senate of senators duly chosen and sworn, or what they call sometimes the constitutional 3/5. That is, it's 3/5 of the entire membership of the Senate, whether they show up to vote or not. And so that imposed a weird burden and was part of what was responsible for flipping the burden of conducting a filibuster from being on the shoulders of members of the minority, and here I don't mean necessarily the minority party, but those in the minority on the position of minority on any given vote. Now that does usually these days break down along party lines, but it didn't always. In other words, if you are in opposition to the bill and willing to conduct a filibuster, you are obviously in the minority, because if you were in the majority, you would just vote the bill down. But if you're in the minority group that's trying to delay passage of the bill or prevent passage of the bill, the old trick was, well, you could just talk and talk and talk, and if there was not 2/3 of the Senate at any given time in favor of shutting you up and getting to the vote already, then you could prevent things from moving forward. But when it changed to 3/5 of those duly chosen and sworn, in other words, you had to prevent the minority side from being able to produce 41 votes. But you also, of course, had to come up with 60 of your own. So, a vote total of 59 to 39 with some absences or whatever still isn't enough to invoke cloture. And that's problematic. And it means that the side in favor of moving forward and having a final vote or moving ahead with the bill and keeping things moving is the one that has to produce the bodies, as opposed to the people who want to hold things up having to produce the bodies to do it. So that's become problematic. And that in combination with the invention of the two-track system, as they call it, which also coincided with the reforms of 1975 and also contrived by Robert Byrd, who seems to have done an awful lot of things to tinker with the workings of the Senate. No surprise to anybody who knew him. But anyway, the two-track system from when Byrd was majority leader allowed for the Senate to move ahead with other business even when a bill was being filibustered. Ordinarily, a bill is on the floor and it's the sole object of their consideration at the time, and the only thing you can do is continue working on a bill until it's disposed of under general basic default rules. But the two-track system allowed for us to say, well, we'll just pull this bill from consideration from now at this point and work on something else and come back to it when we think we have 60 votes. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got an early intervention from Joan McCarter. Good morning, Joan. But she heard that we've moved on to discussion of the filibuster and wanted to make us aware of the latest here. I was just going to wrap up, and I was explaining sort of best I could how the 1975 reforms, changing the filibuster, the cloture threshold from 2/3 down to 3/5, but changing the way the votes were counted, in addition to the two-track system, which allows you to say, okay, bill number one is quote-unquote being filibustered, instead of having senators read us the phone book in order to continue to delay a vote on passage of this bill. We'll simply set the bill aside and pretend it's in a parallel universe on a second track in another Senate, and we'll work on this bill. And in the meantime, that bill isn't being voted on. Nothing's happening with it, so it's being delayed, so the filibustering senators are happy, but they don't have to do any work to keep it from moving forward. It's just sitting there dormant on another track. That, too, made it easy to have silent filibusters, and the requirement of coming up with 60 votes affirmatively for cloture means that until you do, nobody has to do anything to delay the bill. And that was a pretty big change in the way filibusters are conducted. So now they're thinking of bringing back, well, what we'll do is bring back the talking filibuster. Okay, that's a possibility. So now that that is out in the open and we're thinking about it, you're telling me, Joan was just telling me during the break, that Manchin, I guess, has a new, he hinted that he was open to this thing, but didn't necessarily do that much in the way of reform because, well, I haven't read this. What's going on, Joan?
I just sent you the link. It's from CNN yesterday. And right. Good morning.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good.
All right. We can talk.
He, went on every single Sunday show on Sunday saying, well, yeah, we need to put pain back into this. We need to not let them get away with this pain-free and make them stand there and talk. If this is what they're actually going to do, then we have to make it more meaningful. Mm-hmm. But then, according to CNN, people familiar with his thinking, anyway, told CNN that he still favors keeping the 60-vote requirement.
I see.
Which kind of defeats the point.
Well, yeah.
You have endless hours of talking, and you still have to come up with 41 votes to get your bill through.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Very little, if any at all. I mean, I guess what he's trying. It's very difficult to figure out what Manchin's saying at any given point. But
yes, and why he's doing it and anything else.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I guess this is the smallest baby step you could possibly take in filibuster reform. So I guess it makes sense that he would end up offering it. It makes sense, like I said, just as the smallest possible step. It doesn't make any sense, like logically, to make this suggestion. But I guess he's saying, all right, we keep it at 60 votes, but the pain of having to talk will somehow change Republican minds on the vote, which it won't. I mean, if it was 60, I guess you could try saying, okay, well, maybe it should be 60 or 3/5 cloture, but again, go back to the old way of counting, present and voting. I suppose it's possible that a talking filibuster could exhaust enough elderly Republicans that they don't show up to vote. But
it's possible.
But, probably not. But, yeah, so I guess he figures we could get to 60 if they had to exhaust themselves. And either, even if they didn't show up for a vote, or they did, even if they did show up for the vote, they could still say, but I'm too tired to go on with this, so I'm going to change my mind. But all they have to do is show up at that point and say no. So, I don't know.
It makes little sense to me, and I'm having a hard time working through the logistics of how, why.
Why you would, yeah.
You spend hours and hours and hours going through this process, and then they can still say, no.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's not as if there is actual debate happening here.
Yeah.
In which people are exchanging views, changing minds, talking through a process.
Yeah.
Making legislation that, it just doesn't happen that way anymore. Rank and file senators don't legislate.
Yeah.
Leadership figures it out. They go to the committee chairs. The committee chairs and staff write it. Maybe they have a hearing that's, usually purely grandstanding. And senators, spend their time making phone calls to raise money.
Yeah. That's right. That's the way they spend the bulk of their time.
And they're not going to the floor to have debate. They're going to the floor to state their position and then leave. Yeah. And not listen to anybody else and not talk to anybody else.
That's true.
And, they haven't exercised the muscle of legislating.
That's
really.
True.
All 100 of them certainly haven't. So what Manchin thinks it will achieve to just add in the process of having everybody talk for hours and hours and hours and then keep the rest of the rules the same. I have a hard time seeing what's happening here.
Well, he may have the best way you could say it is you could say he may have a unique perspective on this, but I think a more realistic way of saying the same thing is he's probably one of very few, or maybe the only person who thinks so. And he might think so because, well, last weekend when they were trying to pass the COVID relief bill, it happened. He stood there and said, well, I want this. And then people came around and paid court to him and proposed different legislative options. And he chose the one he was willing to go with. And then the bill went forward. But that's not the way it ordinarily happens, and some 90 other senators would probably agree if they were honest and asked about it. Yeah, it's never happened to me. No one's ever approached me on the floor and said, hey, could I get your vote to switch if I change the bill to this? What, on the floor? I mean, that would be awesome, sure, but no one's ever asked me that before. Only Joe Manchin.
What's a lot more interesting in all of this, if it is a power play, if it is Imagine wanting to say, I am the kingmaker. You must bow to me. He'll have a lot more power if the filibuster's gone. He'll have a lot more power when you need
Yeah,
51 votes to get anything done.
that's true. But he'll feel bad about only providing it to Democrats or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you would think that would play into his hands. You're right. You make a good point there, and you could say, but the Republicans will have every opportunity to do the same thing because they also have 50 votes. They could make a proposal to you on the floor or in committee or anywhere and see if they could woo you over. I mean, what could be more democratic than that? Joe Manchin sits there and Democrats try to get his agreement and Republicans try to get his agreement, and the one who puts together the best package for Joe Manchin wins. So I'm sure he would like
Which is
that.
a hell of a way to legislate.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good idea for anyone but Joe Manchin, but oddly, Joe Manchin is opposed to it. So, okay, maybe he just doesn't want the pressure. He wants the attention, but not the pressure. I don't know. The other thing here, and I don't know whether this article gets to it, but the headline makes me think of something else where he says, Democrats still... Oh, I would love to read the headline, but the pop-up ad would love for me to read it. And every time I move to get out of the way...
Where is the article?
Yeah, it covers up the headline. Democrats still face tricky path to gutting filibuster despite Manchin's openness to reforms. This thought occurred to me, not in my own thinking about it and in discussions with others over the weekend. The good stuff that people are proposing, like changing the way we count the votes or changing the number of votes necessary for cloture or requiring talking filibusters or any combination of the three or any other things, they don't necessarily all present themselves as available options through the mechanism we've learned recently to use to change filibuster practice, what we ended up calling the nuclear option.
Right.
When
51 votes on the floor.
Yeah, right.
On the fly,
right.
basically.
And that set it up. I mean, that sort of sets itself up as an understandable procedure. You just say, all right, well, there are 51 or more votes for cloture right now. And the question is, will the chair rule that that's enough? And, they rule either yes or no. And the majority of the Senate votes on whether they agree or disagree with the chair's ruling. And the deal is done. But if you wanted to make any of these other more subtle changes, like how we count votes or how many are necessary or whether or not somebody has to continue talking, it's a lot more difficult to set up a situation with a yes or no vote. Do you agree with what the chair rules or not? If the question is people need to keep talking or we need to count based on the who's present and voting versus who is a sworn senator but hasn't shown up, because you'd have to set up a vote where people weren't showing up to vote in order to get a logical circumstance in which a chair would rule in your favor, or even not rule in your favor, but you'd be voting about a circumstance that isn't happening. I mean, it's kind of a totally different approach. When you have 51 votes and say, is that enough or not? Yes or no from the chair, that makes some sense. If you have, 100 senators on the floor, but say, well, we really only need 50 to make a quorum. I know, but there are 100. Well, I rule that there aren't. Well, I mean, you can rule that, but that's going to look awfully dumb. As opposed to, I think the rule should be 51. It doesn't say that, but that's what I'm ruling. You now have to rule these many senators don't exist. They're not here, even though you can all see them on television. And I don't know anybody that's going to be willing to rule like that from the chair.
Yeah.
So we may need like an actual rules change in order to do this. And that, I think, is more difficult to engineer. Of course, the rule that says, well, it's a 67 vote cloture requirement to do a rules change through regular order, so that's probably not going to happen. Or the old original nuclear option that ended up getting renamed the constitutional option when Republicans wanted to use it, of changing the rules at the very beginning of a new Congress, which of course we're now past. So
too late to do that.
That's troublesome.
I don't know where it's going to go. I think Biden's going to be a big part of whatever happens. Mm-hmm. What we know about how a lot of what happened on Friday unrolled is that Biden was definitely there.
Okay.
He was definitely, on the phone.
Yes.
Weighing in with Manchin, talking to Manchin, pleading with Manchin. Well, I don't know how much pleading he was doing, but I think there was probably a great deal of saying, this is my first big thing. This will help determine how successful my presidency is. And if you change it too much, the House is not going to pass it. Mm-hmm. You're going to screw this up. It's not just you that's at stake here. It's the whole thing. And it's, my presidency.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that was part of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Manchin feels like, okay, I'm the kingmaker now. I have Biden on the phone and he's telling me he needs me and here I am. Forgetting that there's a lot more that's going to be happening here.
Yeah.
For example, one of the next things that's going to come up is H.R. 1, the For the People Act.
Yes.
Which Amy Klobuchar has promised she's bringing to the floor soon.
Yeah, okay.
That affects voting rights, civil rights, but particularly voting rights. And that behind that is Jim Clyburn in the House. The guy who arguably made Joe Biden president.
Okay, yeah.
Because of his influence in South Carolina.
Right.
Because Biden came out, won South Carolina in a landslide, and that was pretty much all she wrote for the Democratic nomination.
True.
And in an interview with The Guardian last week, Clyburn was pretty darn forceful in saying, you're not going to filibuster the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. You are not. You can't do that. And it's got to go away.
Yeah. Well, right. In order to make it through. You shouldn't filibuster it, but, I know you people probably will, so we need to not allow that to happen. But it would be traditional, certainly, for them. The traditionalists, the institutionalists. It would be
traditional, but Manchin and Sinema want to be the ones who do it.
Yeah. I don't know.
There's no way under the sun, Clyburn told The Guardian, that in 2021 we are going to allow the filibuster to be used to deny voting rights.
Okay.
That just ain't going to happen. That would be catastrophic, he said. If Manchin and Sinema enjoy being in the majority, they had better figure out a way to get around the filibuster when it comes to voting and civil rights.
Okay.
So that's another possible filibuster reform that we could be looking at. If you're using reconciliation for the budget, Clyburn says, use reconciliation for voting rights.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, that does open the floodgates. I don't know any parliamentarian who would be willing to, at the moment, say that works under reconciliation.
He says you can't filibuster the budget. That's why we have reconciliation rules. We need to have civil and voting rights reconciliation. So a whole separate
a new category
reconciliation category. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a possibility. I mean, it's a proposal, and as a matter of fact, I had somebody suggest that over the weekend in email as well. That a new category of emergency legislation that would bring its own, its own debate time limit that would using the same mechanism. The budget and reconciliation aren't subject to filibuster because they're time limited in the debate. And I guess because we all thought budget and finance very important, obviously, so it deserves to have this rule that helps it bypass. And I'm okay with the argument that protecting basic rights like that makes sense as emergency type legislation. You won't get any Republican agreement, but
no. But when there
all
are
right.
43 states with 250 some bills looking at restricting voting rights, you could say it's an emergency. You can definitely argue that, yeah, we've got an emergency coming on voting rights.
Yeah. Right. So normal people would agree, and then there's another party that won't.
Right.
Okay. Well, tall order to create that, although, I guess it could be like a field commission, right? Just like, look, if the minute you amass 50 votes for it, or 51, a majority in either house, both houses, I guess it just happens. So the question is, how do you bring Manchin and Sinema around to saying this needs to happen, and I agree, and I want to be a part of it?
And I think you do it on a civil rights bill. You do it on voting rights.
Okay.
Because do they really want to align with the white supremacists?
I would think not. You would hope.
One would hope, yes.
Yeah.
Particularly Sinema.
Yeah. Right. Who did herself no favors with the weird method of casting her no vote. I don't know whether that was supposed to be conscious or not, but
well, she walked in, if you saw the whole clip, walked over to McConnell, said something, I don't know what, patted him on the back, and then moved to the front of the desk where she did her little curtsy, whatever it was.
Kind of weird. It was very
thumbs down.
Slight, but taken in isolation, it looked terrible, and she'll be working hard to live that down.
You can bet it's gonna show up in a primary ad.
Sure, of course, and I don't know whether it's limited to primary ads. Even I don't know how they. I voted the same, or I would have voted the same way because I'm a Republican. But look at how dumb this looks. I suppose to be the Republican ad, but. Well, anyway, so she'll have some work to do, and she maybe she's looking for an opportunity to redeem herself, and this is it. That could be.
It could be. I mean, she's really. I don't know if she's been chastened or what, but she's sort of faded away after Manchin's big fight. Which, by the way, he also really screwed up in making himself the villain of this whole story when Ron Johnson had been doing such a good job.
Yeah. He could have shrugged it off on him, certainly. It's been a weird period for Manchin. And like I said, I keep reading articles purporting to explain his thinking, but none of them work because it doesn't really make any sense. I don't know. I have to get in that space and see if I can understand it. But none of the things that he says he wants to come out of his actions are logical possibilities of what he does. So
yeah,
I'm not sure.
It really just does feel like it's entirely an ego trip.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a hard time finding any other thread going through his actions.
Yeah. It's tough to figure out a different reason for it, and it's weird given that he made an explicit point of saying that you shouldn't govern that way, but then he goes and does it. But okay, so what's new? Or senators say one thing and do another. He's a senator, fine, but yeah, it's really tough to understand, and it's tough to understand from a political point of view. Well, I represent impoverished West Virginia, and so therefore. I'm going to vote against raising the minimum wage and, fine.
Make them pay taxes on their unemployment.
Yeah, that was the part that really killed me. I mean, at least you have the bad excuse of saying, well, many people say, they tend to be wrong about these things, and it's provable that raising the minimum wage means there'll be fewer jobs because employers will they'll want to cut their payroll. There's that. But the taxes on the unemployment benefits, like, okay, so you're ultra conservative. We're cutting taxes. What do you think? What? No. Wait, what? Where am I?
No, you don't cut taxes for those people.
Right. But they're your people. Oh, well, I'm not them. You know, what else is it? I don't know. I would love his explanation to hear wouldn't help. It would have words in it and I wouldn't understand and then we'd be done.
And if he really didn't know that was happening, he needs new staff.
Yeah, I guess that too. Like, there's no explanation offered for that. They just say, well, I don't know. We told him and it didn't register with him. Whatever. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not buying that. I am not buying at all that this was totally sprung on him.
Yeah,
they are not leadership. Knowing Joe Manchin is not going to be so inept as to not give a heads up to Manchin's people that this is the deal that they've made. I just have a hard time believing that they didn't recognize that he had to be at least given a heads up.
You would think. I can't really make it work any other way, I guess. I mean, unless he's just like, okay, so they tell him we're gonna agree to cut the benefits from 400 to 300, and Joe Manchin just says, okay, not why did you agree to that, or I thought you were opposed to that, but now you say okay. He just says, all right, good, and then all right, we're extending them until September. Okay. And, nothing else, Joe. That's it.
Yeah.
And he just says, okay, I don't really, whatever. I wanted 300 and now it's 300 and that's all he's interested in.
Maybe he did just stop listening at that point.
Could be. But
maybe his staff just didn't. I don't know. I don't know. None of it makes sense.
It doesn't. And I can't even imagine having somebody saying, by the way, we're also having it so that the first $10,200 of it is not subject to tax, and that's the part where when I would love to have seen him when he found that out and says, "What? I got to object to this," because that's the part I want to hear. Like, why did you say no? They have to pay taxes on it because what? Because what? I don't know. Because everybody has to do their part. Well, but these are the people who aren't able to do their part because they've been laid off from their part. You see? And like giving them money and then going, now give me that back. Just administratively, it doesn't make any sense. You should be opposed to that as a common sense bedrock kind of person, even if you're not, don't want to describe yourself as conservative. So the program is we give them money and they hold on to it, and they don't use it because they know they're going to have to pay it back to us in a couple of months as taxes, and so it doesn't help them and it doesn't get used. That's the program you wanted? Yes. Why? 'Cause. That's it. What's the 'cause? Tell me why.
There's no, because they didn't bring this to me to sign off on ahead of time.
I guess that's it.
Is the only answer we have. Which still doesn't make sense to me. So
yeah. It's tough to understand.
I don't think Joe Manchin is going to be. Maybe he does. Maybe he does want to be the villain of every story for the next 4 years.
I don't know. I mean, you would think he didn't want to be the villain, but and it may be that he thought he was going to be the
villain to the left, definitely.
Yeah, I want them to know that I stand apart from them. If not, I don't always necessarily totally disagree with them, but I'm not under their control. They can't just assume I'm going to do what they want. Okay, no one was. No, I think you've amply demonstrated that in the past.
Yes.
But okay, yeah, and it was very odd. And the weekend, as it progressed, started to look like. I understand that you can use your leverage to win some big time fights, but you do know that it doesn't look good if you say it has to be this way on every item. Right? That Joe Manchin gets to dictate everything in this bill. But, and he eventually said, all right, there are a few things I don't demand concessions on, and that's good. But, all right, we will have our break coming up here, and, we could go on with this forever, certainly, but I don't know if you can,
We've
but
spent many hours on filibuster reform, that's for sure.
yes, and I think we've covered it well here, and we understand that we won't understand Joe Manchin, but there are other things happening, and we probably ought to
I
give them
think
some
some
time
of the
too.
things we're talking about is what's good that's in the bill. So
Okay, we'll do that. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Here's our opportunity to carry on our discussion. Joan McCarter is still with us, thankfully, and I missed something entirely that she had mentioned to me during the break. Cloture on the nomination of Merrick Garland, which I didn't anticipate really posing a problem at this point, not only because cloture on nominations doesn't require 60 votes anymore, but I thought they were kind of tired of being tagged with the label of the party that won't give any fairness whatsoever to Merrick Garland, especially when he's eventually going to be Attorney General and many of us are criminals. But they did get their cloture. But tell me, Joan, what happened?
Tom Cotton had been holding up the nomination. He had put a hold on it because he's Tom Cotton.
Sure. He's sticking his neck out. Sorry. Yes.
They just sort of set that aside while they dealt with the American Rescue Plan. Mm-hmm. And this was just wonderful. After the vote-a-rama, after the final passage of the bill, after all of those hours of Republicans insisting that they talk about all of their stupid amendments, none of which, well, one, Lisa Murkowski's $800 million for homeless kids wraparound projects to help them through the pandemic, which was a really good one.
Yeah.
Passed on voice vote because it was bipartisan, and then, of course, she voted against the bill. Anyway, all of that was done. All of the Republicans stagger home. Schumer invokes cloture on Garland's nomination.
It just
because none of them were there to say nope.
Okay. So did he just make a unanimous consent request? I guess?
Yep.
And no one. So even after they had just had that happen to them, like 2 days before, when Van Hollen reduced the debate time on the vote-a-rama or on the reconciliation bill from 20 hours to 3.
3, yeah.
And they were, maybe they didn't mind. And then maybe they figured, all right, well, they'll eventually get to cloture on Garland, so who cares? But, yeah, a lot more things. What do you know? It's a 50-50 Senate and talking about making it more difficult for Republicans, and they're going to have to stay on the floor all the time in order to defend their filibuster rights. And but when they're tired, they don't show up to do it. So, okay.
Yeah.
2 good lessons there. So that means his nomination gets a vote. And did you tell me, is that today or tomorrow?
I think it's going to be today.
Okay.
I think.
Good. Well, they can't change it. It's locked in by unanimous consent. But they still have to vote.
Yes.
All right, good. So that's nice. And I guess it's another point in the corner of if you make them show up to do their work, they will occasionally drop the ball and things will move forward. So good.
And I guess you have to make them show up and have 41 people there at all times.
Yes, that would be a
if you're going to keep a 60-vote margin like Manchin apparently wants to, they actually have to have 41 of them there at all times.
Yeah,
so
that's a good idea.
I suppose that could work.
Yeah, I had to go back and mine our old posts from like 2010 2009, 2010 for all the how many of these things did we come up with last time when we were thinking of it?
I don't remember.
Yeah,
We do have to. We do have to send me a bunch of links, and then next week we can talk about it again.
Yeah,
because I don't remember all of the variations we came up with.
That's I think most of them were in there, and certainly the changing, shifting the burden so that they had to produce the bodies. I know I at some point discussed that the idea of having them keep 41 senators on the floor, and that the chair ought to be able to take notice of when somebody's missing, but or at least somebody should be able to move from the floor. And look, I want to close the doors and count everybody who's here. But yeah, that would be the best way of doing it. I mean, the ultimate reason for the filibuster existing, they don't call it the filibuster in rules terms. It's extended debate. Filibuster just sort of a nickname for it. And of course, when they changed the procedure, no debate took place at all. So just reviving the old purpose of it. And if you're not interested enough in the debate to stay there and listen, then there's really no reason to be having it. It makes sense. So let's go forward with the vote. And the minute there are fewer than 40 of you interested in listening to more debate, that should, by definition, mean that there's 60 of you not interested and wanting to move forward. And if you're not interested because you're bored or you want to sleep or you want to raise money, that's not a good reason.
Right.
So, all right. Yeah, we'll mine those old posts and see what we can find. But that's not the only parliamentary weirdness happening, and the Senate isn't the only place it's happening either. You also
but let's put that on hold for a little bit to talk about actually what was accomplished Saturday.
Oh, yes. So why don't I let you do that?
Because it is kind of a BFD, as Joe Biden would like to say.
Yeah, I love the procedure. You want to tell me what happened with legislation and what's going to affect lives?
That 97% of Americans' children are going to get assistance because of this. The child tax credit goes to 97% of families with children.
That seems like a large percentage. I might have some
of
those
a large
children.
Percentage.
Okay.
Because it's one of the tax credits that actually does apply to middle class families as well as lower income families. For a single person, I think that the income limit is $200,000 to still be able to get the child tax credit.
Well, all right.
Not in danger. A lot of families are going to be helped in really big ways.
So yeah, this is pretty good.
This is the first time in recent memory that a tax cut has actually disproportionately gone to help the lowest tiers of the economic status. And in really big ways, like, 20% of the benefit goes to the lowest, the bottom percentile of the tax brackets.
All right.
It's massive. It's huge. This will really help. and when Biden says it's going to reduce child poverty by almost half, it's going to do that.
All right.
So yes, the reduction from $400 per week for unemployed people to $300 was hard to take.
Yeah.
Not getting the minimum wage was hard to take, but there's still so much in this that's going to help people. The $1,400 stimulus checks. Yeah, we really would have wanted 2,000 full, and we really would have wanted them every month. But
it's expensive to live in this time.
Yeah, $1,400 also applies to every child.
Yes.
The previous ones had cut rates, $500 for kids.
Yeah.
It's now $1,400 per child and per adult dependent.
Right.
So a college-age kid.
Yeah. Right, left out the last one.
Going to get that money. So it really is good chunks of money going to the people who need it most, and it really is a big deal.
Yeah. Well, that's true, and I've been watching more, or seeing more and more coverage and reading the other things, but seeing the headlines of, well, actually, when you look at it, not only was this a big accomplishment, but this really has the potential to change the way we, or use the tax code to really do some serious good for people who are usually ignored by the tax code. And it's a very serious restructuring, which is, of course, exactly what reconciliation ought to be used for. So, yeah.
And the other thing that's important is that it shows Democrats are capable of learning from their mistakes.
That would be good. Yeah, I did see
To
a
a
lot of
person,
discussion
they
of that
say,
as well.
we saw what happened in 2009 and 2010 with a stimulus that wasn't big enough and with trying to court Republicans to come around on health care.
Yes.
And we saw that didn't work, and we're not going to do that again.
Yeah,
and this time we're going to pass something really big that helps a lot of people, and we're going to take credit for it. And they're going to know, because we're going to send out a letter with our name on it that says, this is courtesy President Joe Biden and the Democratic Senate.
Well, I hope so. Because, I did see somebody suggesting, well, Trump, of course, insisted that those checks say his name on them. And then they started using debit cards, and I don't know, that was kind of dumb. But anyway, it was a big deal. I'm going to put my name on it, and everyone should know that Donald Trump is the one who did this. And of course, he did it in the most personally aggrandizing way. But we could distribute the credit better. But there are a lot of people who think, well, why shouldn't we be making it very clear, not only that who brought it to you, but who didn't. Some suggested it should say on the check, not a single Republican voted for you to have this, by the way. They all wanted to take this away from you. And if you're voting for them, you're making a huge mistake. But it doesn't fit on the memo line of a check. But
it really, there's so much in it that they did that was great. In the perfecting amendment, it was sort of like Schumer's magic wand. It was sort of amazing, his perfecting amendment. He restored $10 billion that had been cut from cities and counties, earmarked specifically for broadband. That was something that some of his conservatives wanted.
Okay.
And he basically took $10 billion out of questionable paycheck protection loans to nonprofit organizations like the Catholic Archdiocese. Said, okay, we're going to put that $10 billion back in for local government. He added child care grants. He added another, I think it was $3.6 billion. This was what he took away from the Paycheck Protection Program. $3.6 billion to add to the pot for restaurants and bars. So now there's $28.6 billion going to restaurants and bars, money that it's specifically for them that had, because they had been really cut out from paycheck protection. A lot of what happened with paycheck protection just didn't apply to them. So there's this added money for them. It's just, he really did a lot in his perfecting amendment.
All right.
I wrote about it yesterday to help. So that was significant. Another little thing that Elizabeth Warren got in that I loved, and Menendez.
Okay.
Saying that student loan debt forgiveness can't be taxed through 2025.
Good. All right.
Which was a brilliant little stroke.
Yeah.
Because, and this is a stupid thing in our tax code, as stupid as unemployment taxes or unemployment insurance being taxed. Student loan debt forgiveness is taxable.
Yeah.
It's considered taxable income.
Yeah. Debt forgiveness in general. That's true. And I know that the original point was, rich people will structure things as debt forgiveness in the hopes of evading taxes. So they wanted to capture that, and unfortunately there's a lot of other people who have debt, and many of them are poor. That's how you get poor. Although I don't know, somehow rich people's debt is great. I'm not certain why they love it so much, but for them they manage to make it work. But if you don't have money to start with, debt sucks.
Debt sucks. Student loan debt particularly sucks. So that's laying the groundwork there for student debt forgiveness, which is, I would call it a big deal.
Sure. Easily targeted.
People who have lost their jobs and didn't want to lose their health insurance and have been paying COBRA premiums.
Okay, yes.
Which means you're paying your part and your employer's part, and it's really, really expensive. If you lost your job because of this pandemic, you don't have to pay any of the premium for your Cobra coverage. You get to carry it, and the government picks up 100%.
Well, that's amazing. I didn't even realize
Yeah.
that was the case until. Well, thankfully, I haven't had to deal with Cobra payments in a while. That's nice, and I guess anytime you can leave it behind from your life, you do it. But yeah, for everybody else who's still stuck with it, and particularly now, it would be a lot of people because of the economic downturn, and that's pretty astonishing. That's socialism. What's going on here?
It is socialism.
I want a piece of that.
It's a BFD.
Yeah.
And,
wow, okay.
all of the money that cities and states and tribes and counties have been asking for. There are some strings, but they're finally getting that funding. It's a big deal. It's a big deal.
And I guess, once again, not just rhetorically pointing this out, Joe Manchin voted for that.
Joe Manchin voted for it. Not a single Republican voted for it.
Well, I can understand why they wouldn't want to vote for some of these really good things. But yeah, Joe Manchin, pain in the ass though he is, voted in favor in the end of all of these fantastic things. He didn't insist on any of these being jettisoned, and didn't okay it on amendment time, but say no on final passage. Said, you got it. I vote for this. West Virginia wants it too. So, okay, good. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't really realize exactly how it was. And I think I fell prey to the, everybody on my timeline is complaining.
It's easy to get caught up in the procedure. It's easy to get caught up in what you're losing.
Yeah.
Minimum wage, because it's been such a huge fight for so long.
True.
And the very generous $400 from the House being cut to $300 and all of this, but there's still so much there that will really help people.
Yes.
That's the thing to take out of this and to remember and to talk about.
I think it's wise to spend time on that because, when you do get caught up in the procedure, of course, it's difficult enough as it is because the procedure is tough, but, the mission of the person guiding you through procedure is, you want this? I don't even evaluate why you want it. I have to try to get it for you. I have not been able to engineer that. I have failed. A failure. That's what I take away from this thing. Meanwhile, of course, it could be a strategic thing. While you were failing over here, all of this passed through. But the substance of the bill, many people convinced that that's the important part. So I'll have to agree with them. And it's easy to remember all the fights that you lost if you can't engineer a proper procedure to shoehorn something that really doesn't necessarily belong there because, well, that's a good thing. We want that. How come I can't make that work? Minimum wage. I don't know. But in the meantime, many good things happened and they did work. And you should be reminded that happened. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. And now we can talk about procedure on the House side.
Okay, well then I understand.
Because this is much juicier and much more irritating.
That's where I belong. Yes.
Because it's Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Right.
And the House Freedom Caucus, of course, the maniacs.
Yeah, so that's where her support base comes from. I did mention the other day she's making a nuisance of herself by asking for making an adjournment motion every day on the House floor, which fails, but is annoying. So yesterday's story was that increasing numbers of Republicans are pissed that they have to interrupt their work on committees, which she doesn't have any of.
Right. And this is her revenge.
Yes. I guess she's
she
mad
just
at
very
them.
snidely called this, apparently, to some reporter last night, her committee work.
Well, she's working in the committee of the whole House on the State of the Union.
Right.
So technically, so she's bothering everybody else with it, and they're starting in increasing numbers to vote against her adjournment motions, which doesn't matter in terms of the outcome. It's going to fail, but it's a message to her. But now she's got something else that she's
Something
doing.
else, and she pulled it last night when the House was going to try to do a bunch of suspensions.
Ah, okay.
including one that was Congressional Gold Medal Awards for the Capitol Police Force and Metropolitan Police Department that came and saved them on January 6th.
Ah,
They were
yes.
going to award these medals with suspension bills.
All right. Yeah,
And you know how
non-controversial.
explain suspensions to the people listening at home.
Everybody, listen. Yeah. So suspension of the rules is the procedure that they use basically when they have a non-controversial item. Post office renaming, unless you're naming it for Hitler, they want a roll call vote on that one. But don't do that. But yeah, so these congressional gold medals, renaming federal buildings, sometimes regular substantive legislation, but that doesn't carry a lot of controversy with it. They put on this suspensions calendar, and it shortens debate to 40 minutes if you even want that long. The trade-off being it has to, when you do have a roll call vote on it, it requires 2/3 to pass. But very often, because they're non-controversial things, they're able to voice vote on them and not bother with a roll call vote
And
or
not even really
unanimous
show up on the
consent.
floor
Yeah,
because you don't have to because it's
right.
suspension and
So
somebody else is going to
that,
be there and take care of it.
yeah. So very
Yeah.
often a lot of them are handled that way. And on a Monday, you'll tend to find those things on the floor where they say, 3/4 to the full slate of these things can be taken care of without anybody showing up. So everybody who's spending Monday flying back to DC, work is being done. We don't need you to be on the floor to vote unless someone is a jerk.
Unless Marjorie Taylor Greene and
Yes.
some of the Freedom Caucus maniacs say, oh, we're going to make you have roll call votes on these,
Yeah.
which is what they did yesterday.
Okay. And I mean, it doesn't end up doing very much damage because you can postpone those, either consideration of the bills, which they ended up doing, or the votes themselves. But here, what, they had these congressional gold medals set for the police, and they ended up saying, all right, we're going to. Did they pull consideration of all the bills? Is
Well,
that what they
they've
ended up doing?
delayed. There were
Delayed.
13 of them. They've delayed them.
Okay.
It would have taken about 10 hours to go through all of them because of the COVID restrictions,
Oh,
because you can
yes,
only take
that's what it
small
is.
groups of people onto the floor. So,
Now I remember why that's so bad. Because,
yeah.
yeah, from time to time you will see roll call votes taken on some or all of these suspensions, but the usual procedure in non-COVID times is they say, all right, there's usually a rule that they can avail themselves of that says, we'll postpone the vote until late tonight. And then starting at 7:30 p.m. on a Monday, they just have a series of votes and just say, stay on the floor, everybody. We're going to vote one after the other on these 13 bills. And it's taken care of in relatively short order. But now you can't have everybody staying on the floor together anymore because COVID. And every vote takes 45 minutes at a minimum,
Right.
rotating people in and out. It's, yeah, okay. So now with 13 bills and every one of them requiring almost an hour for things that everybody approves of that are non-controversial, just making an annoyance of herself. So keep it
Yeah.
up. I don't think it's going to get you
And
expelled.
it's going to be interesting to see what she pulls with her maniac friends on the American Rescue Plan. Which I think there was a bit of a delay. It finally went over from the Senate to the House this morning.
Okay.
They had a lot of paperwork to do with it, it turns out.
No.
And leave the vote. Oh, just seeing it's going to be tomorrow.
Okay.
So Rules is meeting this afternoon and evening, and they're going to bring it tomorrow.
Okay. Well, that makes good sense. So, yeah, a lot
And
of-
what they're going to do with all of these suspensions, I'm not sure. Maybe they're going to try to work through them today.
Okay. Yeah, they may have to reorder them, reprioritize them. They'll give, some of them have Republican sponsors and give them a chance to get back in town and, I don't know, either yell at Marjorie Taylor Greene, which probably won't work very well, or call on their friends in the Freedom Caucus. Well, can't you let this one through or that one through and see if they can piecemeal get some of these things through on voice vote or by unanimous consent and see if they can get them to, oh, you had your stunt yesterday. Will you agree that that was enough? And I guess eventually if Green just says, this is all I have in life, and more Republicans start to get annoyed with her, I don't know what they do with it. I mean, I suppose they could join in a censure for her, but that doesn't stop her either. Yeah, the only way to stop her from doing this is to do what we said you should have done in the first place and kick her out.
Yeah.
But, yeah, they won't be doing that unless, I don't know, I guess if she keeps it up for a year and then no more Republicans can stand it, they can come up with something. But
I think that's what it's going to take, Republicans getting fed up with her, I think.
Yeah.
Or,
it won't matter to her if Democrats are angry.
Maybe Liz Cheney should take her duck hunting.
Yeah, that's an idea. Hey, my dad's coming. Get ready to apologize. It can happen. Yeah, she would probably love it too. And
she is, though, wearing very, very thin on many of her colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle.
Yeah, I can imagine why that would be the case. And I don't know if she cares.
Because, a lot of these people are actually trying to do stuff.
Yeah.
Wahlberg from Michigan, what's his first name, Tim?
Yes.
Said he was on a Zoom call when he was talking to folks, his local Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
And she interrupted it when he had to go vote to adjourn the House. Of course, he probably voted with her, but still.
Right. I want to adjourn so I can do my Zoom call.
She's interrupting their meetings. She's interrupting committee work. She's
fundraising, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, he was one of the 18 Republicans who bucked Green.
Yeah.
And voted against.
He was mad. So, yeah, we'll see whether that continues and whether she takes any message away from it. I mean, I guess if you start to see 100 Republicans voting no on motions to adjourn, that would be a pretty obvious signal. But I mean, none of it bothers her. What does she have to lose? She's not moving any legislation, so they can't punish her with that. She's not on any committees, they can't punish her with that.
I still say they should put her in an office in the basement. Yeah,
right. Something like that, or those fifth floor cannon offices that they're in the storage cages.
Yeah.
That's people have those as offices, so it's pretty crazy. They might as well give that one to her. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how they fix this problem until she gets it to where Republicans start saying, "Forget it. We're going to vote to expel you." She wouldn't.
Yeah.
There's no reason to stop, and it's still a reflexive vote on adjournment for Republicans, most of them. So, okay, good luck to her, and I hope that she makes things worse for herself every day. That's all. I don't have any objection to that.
Forcing a delay on awarding Congressional Medals of Honor to the people who saved their lives on January 6th.
Right. But, yeah, again, for her, she's like, curses foiled again by these people. I'm not giving them a gold medal. They ruined my insurrection that I took people around on tours to facilitate. So she's bit of an odd duck.
I think that was Boebert, though.
Oh, okay. Oh, are they different? I didn't realize. Okay.
One's blonde and one's brunette.
Okay, well, that's how I'll tell them apart. They're about the same size, I think, so I have to go with that. And with masks, when they agree to wear them, there's no way for me to tell. So I'll go with the hair color. All right. Well, thanks, Jonah. Appreciate the longer stretch today. We really needed it. A good reminder of all the fantastic substantive accomplishments in the American Rescue Plan, now on its way back to the House for, we hope, quick approval in the form that the Senate handed it to them in and on to the president's desk.
That's the plan.
Okay. And it's called a plan, too.
And it's called a plan.
Very fitting. Thank you very much, though, for the additional time, and we'll look forward to speaking with you next week, and maybe it'll all be signed, sealed, and we'll be awaiting delivery. by the time
And
next
maybe
week
we'll
rolls
even know what's going to happen with filibuster.
Yeah, that might be helpful as well. I'm excited that this could happen. I feel like I've retired from the lecture circuit on this one. But we are where we are because of the work we did that one time.
Absolutely.
So, pretty good. All right, Joan, we'll check in with you next week. Thanks again, and looking forward to what happens. All right, take
Bye-bye.
it easy. Time now for handing things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy up next, covering, well, everything else that we didn't get to today because we were mired in procedure.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, Dr. Seuss is still on the docket. I can see that much from his summary for today. What else? Twitter filed suit against the Texas Attorney General claiming abuse of power in retaliation for the social media company banning Trump. That is really interesting, too. That's what the Texas Attorney General is spending his time on.